And yeah, we're recording this session. Welcome to Live from Baku, week 1. We have a group of amazing delegates on the ground who are joining us tonight. We're going to have a little panel conversation. Next slide, Claire. Next slide. Yep. Gonna welcoming you all right now into the space with us. We're going to do a land and labor acknowledgement. I'm going to talk a little bit about who Climate Generation is and a really super brief overview of COP, the Conference of Parties. And then we've prepared some questions for our panel of delegates to answer. And if there's time to take questions from the audience, we will do so. And then we'll let you know some further opportunities to engage. So welcome to our window into COP. So, Climate Generation's offices are on the stolen and occupied lands of the Dakota and Anishinaabe people. We recognize the immense harm caused by centuries of genocide, cultural erasure, and injustice. We also acknowledge that much of what we know of the United States, including its culture, economic growth, and development, has been made possible by the labor of enslaved Africans, their descendants, their ascendants, who suffered the horror of the transatlantic trafficking of their people, chattel slavery, Jim Crow, and other harms that continue today. We are indebted to their labor and their sacrifice, and we must acknowledge the tremors of that violence throughout the generations and resulting impact that can still be felt and witnessed today. We also want to recognize the immigrant and American-born workers of African, Asian, and Central and South American descent whose labor remains hidden in the shadows, but still contributes to the well-being of our collective community. Next slide. So words are great, but we at Climate Generation are hoping and trying to move beyond acknowledgement. And so I've listed the logos of some of our partner organizations and organizations that our delegates represent in the hope that you will look them up, follow, sign up for their e-newsletter, and make a contribution if you are in a position to do so. COPAL is an organization that works with Latinx folks from across the state of Minnesota. McGizzy works with Indigenous youth right down the street from Climate Generation here in Minneapolis. Nexus Community Partners is a Twin City-based organization that does Black wealth building. And Wakan TP is another partner organization. We have a delegate on the ground from Wakan TP here with us tonight, I hope. Who are protecting sacred Dakota lands in the St. Paul area and doing environmental justice programming and cultural programming from that site. Climate Generation ignites and sustains the ability of educators, youth, and communities to act on the systems perpetuating the climate crisis. We envision a just and abundant world beyond a climate crisis. For more than 18 years, y'all, we've been building climate literacy, amplifying personal connections to the climate change, and developing powerful advocates among educators, youth, and communities through collaboration and partnership. Our work addresses climate change in 3 areas: education, youth activism, and community engagement. I'm going to apologize for my emotion, but I am literally in awe and gratitude for the people that are representing Climate Generation at COP this year. I can't wait for you to meet them. So if you are new to this scene and you didn't join us a few weeks ago when we introduced the delegation, just a little bit of understanding about COP. It is an amazingly complex and confusing space. The United Nations Framework Convention for Climate Change was established in 1992 at an Earth Summit held in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. This framework is an actual treaty that countries have signed on to that binds them together to come together every year and figure out how to save us and the planet from the climate crisis. Next slide, Claire. Who's at COP? kind of two groups. There are parties. The parties are the countries and the nations and states that have signed that original agreement, the UNFCCC, the Kyoto Protocol, the Doha Amendment to the Kyoto Protocol, and or the Paris Agreement. So here at COP, folks are still negotiating around implementation of the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement simultaneously. And some countries signed on to all of those, and some countries signed on to some of them. Also, and this is who we are, civil society is present in this space. And so this includes United Nations agencies and their staff. It includes international intergovernmental organizations, so regional development banks and other advocacy groups that countries are members of. And then a whole slew of non-governmental organizations, those that are working in environmental justice, research organizations representing gender issues, indigenous issues, trade unions, and all sorts of other people. And so civil society gets access to the Conference of the Parties as observers. And so we are there to try to hold the government officials accountable to negotiating the way forward and implementing these agreements in ways that center climate justice and the people who are most impacted. Is that my last slide, Claire? Awesome. So who is with us tonight? Just Zoe and Ramiro? And Jen and Manny and Cook and Analia and Rakia. Yay. All right. Good group of people. I've got 4 question prompts. I'm just going to start with the first one, and you can take turns answering and pass the laptop as you choose. What are you learning this first week at COP? And what are you learning that you hope to bring back to your community back here in Minnesota?
Absolutely. Thank you, Susan, for that introduction. And I appreciate everyone on the call here today. It is approximately 9 o'clock. We've had a full day of conference of parties. We're on week 1, but I'll be here for 2 weeks. So look forward to hearing more from me on the second week of the webinar. I'll go ahead and answer this first question. I've been spending the majority of my time at the Australian Pavilion and the Indigenous International Pavilion. A lot of great Indigenous content coming from Africa to Asia to especially Australia, where I feel like a lot of sharing of knowledge and passing of knowledge has been. So what I'm learning, I'm very connected with the Mississippi River. It's a place that I was born by, have lived by, so currently some of the Aboriginal people, early Aunt Polly has been doing a lot of work around protecting of water and those sacred sites. So just learning the interconnectedness that we are protecting our sacred sites at a global scale and kind of dealing with the same mining companies and individuals, governments who are not listening to these indigenous voices. So sharing space with elders and building intergenerational relationships with people who I hold very valuable in my life. So that's what I've been learning, and I'll pass it to whoever wants to go next.
Yeah, thank you so much, Susan. My name is Zoe, and I am the comms manager here at Climate Generation. And I also just wanted to shout out one of our other partners really quick, and then IPL. Analia is with us here, and she leads the Youth Empower group in MNIPL, and she's just another organization that I want to spotlight, who's just been doing really amazing work around the Twin Cities, and folks on this call should look at and pay attention to their amazing work. In regards to your question, Susan, I have to say, I have to agree with Ramiro that the Australian Pavilion has been putting up some of the best panels that I've been seeing, aside from the Indigenous Peoples Pavilion. Both of those have showcased leaders who are from their communities, Indigenous leaders. And I think what is getting reiterated to me is that communities know what they need, and people in power are just often sidelining them. And I think that's something that we see in communities at home in the Twin Cities or in wherever you're tuning in from. And it's showcased on the global stage here at COP. So that's just something I've been sitting with and thinking about attending these panels, that there's really amazing people here who know what they're talking about and know what they need. And yeah.
Good afternoon from Baku and good morning from Minneapolis. I'm Manny Vasquez. I'm a youth delegate with Climate Generation here at COP29. If you guys didn't know, this COP is known as the Finance COP. So I've been learning a lot about just very big vocabulary, loss and damage, NDC, which is naturally determined contributions, on how different countries are going to combat and help like the global South. It's just very, very technical over here, so I've been trying to just absorb as much as I can without getting too overwhelmed. Yeah.
Thanks, Manny.
Hey everyone, how's it going? My name's Analia Seguido Santos, she, her, and hers pronouns. I'm really excited to be here, and this is my fourth COP, which I'm starting to feel like a COP veteran, which is a strange thing to say. But so as Manny said, this is a finance COP, and this is a very technical one, as I'm realizing day by day. A lot of what's talked about in this space goes miles above my head, and I'm in a lot of national and international policy spaces. So even after having been to a few of these, there's stuff that I'm like, I just don't know what they're talking about. I don't know what they're talking about, if I'm being real. Which is really frustrating sometimes. Especially, as there's a lot of young people in the space and just people who are experiencing this for the first time. So I'm going to share just a little bit about my notes, because we've been attending CAN, so Climate Action Network, and then US CAN daily meetings, which have been really helpful in understanding a lot of what's going on in negotiations, because we are observers. We are not privy to most negotiations. So there's stuff being talked about that still goes way over our head, but I think is helpful to understand. So Rakia and I actually attended John Podesta's briefing yesterday. They only let one person from each organ, so I took the US CAN spot, and Rakia took Climate Gen's. It was underwhelming. It was an hour of listening to our climate delegation tell us about what the United States is talking about and doing or not doing, in my opinion. But ultimately, we had some folks ask questions about if we're going to have an ambitious NDC or nationally determined contribution, as Manny said, because our NDCs are due in February. So, somebody on the US Fair Shares group asked if we're going to have an ambitious one, and the US negotiating team was like, yes, we will. Next question. We're like, okay, we're not getting much from them. They told us that as far as, climate finance and looking at at least a $1 trillion down payment to the global South from the global North, that we can't promise things that we can't fulfill, which yes, and also the global South has been asking for at least a down payment of really 5 trillion, and we know that that's not enough for a long time. So that was a little disappointing. We are constantly hearing about Article 6, which is looking at false solutions in carbon markets, which I wish that I understood a lot more and could explain to y'all, but I just really encourage folks to find out what they can, because at this point we're hearing about it every day. Sorry, are we gonna have more time to talk about? No, it's okay. Let me not go too much into this and take up too much time, actually. But we've been hearing consistently about Article 6 and what our plans are for adaptation mitigation and a just transition work program. So I'm not taking up too much more time. I'm gonna actually stop myself and pass to the next person, and I'll talk more about it later. But this COP is different, every COP is different. We're also struggling finding breakfast every day, but that is a different issue. Who wants to go next?
Thanks, Analia.
Hello, so my name is Rukia Gassman. And for me, a lot of what I've been learning from COP has been getting to understand a lot of, I kind of was kind of expecting a lot of the stuff that I'm learning about, hearing about to be just mainly global things that are just so, kind of really just far beyond me and like, just like far beyond just like, local work. But at a lot of the press conferences and events that I've gone to, I've actually gotten to learn a lot about a lot of local issues that are happening to other people. And honestly, those were very enlightening and inspiring just to understand how climate disruption is kind of impacting so many different people in different places in different ways. For example, the other day I was at a press conference for or like a panel of people discussing from Pacific Island nations. And they were kind of talking about their experiences with climate change and how, it's impacting their islands and how they kind of like they're kind of feeling like there's not the future of their island is in jeopardy. And today I was at another panel discussion where it was kind of like all about people talking about their personal experiences with climate change. And so there were so many different things from people. I heard about a girl that grew up in Pakistan and just, she grew up with her village, just going completely flooded. They had to move away, and it's just getting to know all these different local issues that are all intrinsically connected by climate change. Just getting to understand these different perspectives was kind of one of the most important things that I learned at COP. So
Thank you, Rukia. Is there anybody else in the shared space, or can I invite Antavia to share with us?
Yeah, I can go really quick. So hi everyone, my name is Jen Gragel. I work at Wakantipia Agape as the EJ and Stewardship Program Manager. Really grateful that Climate Generation, kind of picked or selected me to come on this delegation because I've been learning a lot, honestly. I really I kind of studied COP in school as well as like the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement. So just to kind of be here on the ground, seeing like the culture that these decisions are made in is like really fascinating to me because I've kind of always wondered why like global policy is so disconnected and to community in a lot of ways. And but being here, it's really, at first I was confused because I was meeting so many amazing Indigenous people that really get it and really understand what it takes to ensure their own survival. And what I'm seeing though is that, the leaders are very disconnected from those conversations. And even if they claim to listen to those conversations, sometimes I think that it's kind of become a symbolic measure as opposed to actually listening to change things. And so I feel like, sorry, we're getting some feedback here. So I just have felt like those disconnections that have kind of occurred throughout time here during COP is, really, I've been noticing it this week, especially because what I see is Indigenous communities claiming that they need this help and that they need this funding in order to ensure their own survival with climate change. But what we see with the world leaders, like what we hear about is that they're negotiating things like carbon credits and carbon markets and offsets and all these things that a lot of climate justice activists that claim, or they know that those are all really a scam, and Indigenous people know that those are a scam as well. And so, it's kind of like that conversation is going on one side, and then like these really real, amazing conversations with Indigenous folks are happening on another side. So really, it's kind of just solidified what I know is that Indigenous people learning from Indigenous people is how we're really going to survive, as opposed to depending on world leaders. It's not going to happen in that way. But I'll pass it to Ontavia.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I've been noticing is the differences in privilege based in where your headspace is at regarding climate change. I've noticed that, so Jen, you kind of touched on this a little bit, that Indigenous communities are focusing so much on climate adaptation now rather than climate mitigation. Because there's a difference, right, between considering, is this something that we're planning on preventing sometime in the future, versus, hey, this is something that's affecting my community right now, and we need to start making some changes. And so there's a difference I've noticed a lot with people who are feeling those effects right now, are starting to move their conversation towards climate adaptation, and further away from climate mitigation, just out of a necessity. And as Manny mentioned, this one is focused more so on the financial piece of climate change and mitigation and adaptation. And so with that, there's a lot of conversation happening around who's going to fund climate adaptation and who's going to fund climate mitigation efforts. And how do we hold big polluting partners and government entities responsible financially? How do you incentivize a large proverbial financial beast to do the right thing? Because it hasn't really ever happened. So why do we really think that changing policy is going to change hearts and desires, especially very quickly? And so there's a lot of concern around that. And as Jen mentioned also, like, we're kind of feeling like it's all a scam. And an interesting thing you said too, Jen, was, like, there's kind of these two conversations happening. And I will say bluntly, like, both of these conversations are happening by two different groups, in physically different spaces, right? So if you enter the pavilion, you're seeing a lot more of that really solid representation from around the world. A lot of aggregated wisdom from many different communities around the world, not just Indigenous either, but a lot of different types of indigeneity are being represented. But then the policy discussions are happening without any of that representation, physically removed in a completely different part of COP, right? And so there is sort of this pandering to inclusivity, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's actually having an effect on the policy discussions at hand. So that's a little bit heartbreaking. And with that, I'll wrap it up with that question.
Thank you so very much, Antavia. I think Cook has some comments.
Yeah, I'll kind of follow along with Antavia and that too, that but that's one of the biggest things that I notice is that although there's representation, there's not necessarily an equity occurring here where there's a clear separation between the climate activists versus the policymakers versus the scientists. And at first I was hoping that it would be but it feels like because of the silos that all the great work that's being done with all three parties are not really overlapping or reaching each other. So that's one of the main things that I noticed at this COP versus the SB that I went to in Bonn. Yeah.
Thanks so very much. Next question, if you're all ready. Tell us about any particularly impactful conversation you've had or person that you have met. Because we know that the real sort of impact comes from meeting folks from other parts of the world. And you've all touched on that just a little bit, but go a little bit deeper. Tell us about someone who has impacted the way you see the world this week.
Absolutely. Good question there. I'm a little tired over here, so I'll answer it to my best ability. I did mention previously Aunt Polly Cutmore, who is Aboriginal Maori of Australia. Our particular conversation, feel free to remember that name because she will be highlighted from our local to global section, which we just started this year. An amazing portion of our content that we're really excited to share with our audience who are on this call and who are signed up. But Auntie Cutmore, Auntie Polly, shared how she is really looking for the younger generation to also stand beside the elder generation as we move towards a more just world potentially. Her words were extremely, like her words resonated with me. It felt like I had been speaking to an auntie. And as you know, we all kind of share similar experiences, but she held me, hugged me, and consoled me in some of my some of the things I was sharing as well during our conversation. But she definitely is continuing on preserving her culture, which we heard that the Aboriginals of Australia are some of the most ancient indigenous populations around, and she shared something specific that really stuck to me that you'll also read. But as she ended her panel, she spoke about coming out of a colonial coma, and really taking back what is ours, and also writing up reports so that other people don't write reports for us, like mining companies or any fracking industries or whoever tries to claim they know who indigenous people are or what we're about. So as Jen, Tavia, and the group as this group has shared, the indigenous elders are really out there sharing their knowledge systems with anyone in those pavilion spaces. So it's a beautiful thing.
Yes, thank you, Romero. Yeah, I've had a couple really great conversations. And one that really sticks out is with Mary Payne. And she's also someone who I had the opportunity to interview. She was on one of the panels that I was listening to. And she really dove into, her panel was about ACE principles, which is something that our organization is a part of. And that is really something in the universe of COP, is bringing non-governmental organizations into the fold, bringing civil society into the fold through engagement and using it as a tool, right, to bring civil society to the table with climate change. And specifically in that, one of those things is storytelling, right? And that's something that's really big at Climate Generation. And she was talking about it, something that really stuck with me was this idea that for her, as an Indigenous woman, storytelling is something that has always been a part of her culture. And it has always been something where she has been envisioning like a different culture, a different future, and thinking about how storytelling for everybody is something where it's challenging a culture, challenging things in our world where we're not getting shown by world leaders, we're often not getting taught in schools. And so when there are real stories out there and when we can build stories that allow us to actually see a future that is different and also, tell the story of communities in their own voices, right? Like representing themselves, not getting told a story from oppressors. That's a really powerful thing. And so I think having that conversation with her, which will also be featured in the digest in her own words, was one of the more powerful conversations I've had here. Yeah, there were many others as well, but that one stuck out to me. And I'll pass it to whoever might be ready. Manny.
Thanks, Zoe.
Hi, I've been in so many panels with so many amazing speakers, but just some conversations that really stood out to me. I've had the pleasure of meeting our brothers and sisters from Palestine. I've met Mohammed and Balkis. They're both two youth who reside in Palestine and are here at COP29, but just hearing their stories firsthand has really just given me has also heartbroken me, but given me the motivation to really stand in solidarity with them even further. There's been multiple actions to to stand against the genocide, and just being with them, being like with people with Palestine and being in those actions has been really powerful. And I've also learned, like, also with that genocide that's going on, it's also been an ecocide. They're destroying all of their lands, all of their sacred trees. With their olive trees, they hold them very dear to their heart. And I heard there's like 3 million olive trees that were burned down, and I just like it breaks my heart just hearing that. But I'm very lucky to be able to hear those stories from firsthand people. And I've also had conversations with a leader from the Wisdom Keepers delegation, Jacob Johns, and just hearing him in panels, hearing how his perspective on battling this climate crisis and battling how he's going forward with the indigenous community, and the indigenous representation at COP29 has really given me even more like support and motivation to really keep on doing this type of work. And yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Manny.
Pass it to Rakia.
Hello, so for me, yeah, kind of the same. I feel like I've met so many different people, gone to so many press conferences and panels. But one person that kind of resonated with me was someone I saw at a discussion panel today, actually. And she was actually very unique. She was a young girl that's like 12 years old, and she's out here at this panel, and she's talking about her work that she's done in her community in India, and how she has she founded a program, a foundation that gets people to plant trees, and she and her group have planted over 150,000 trees. And I mean, you know, obviously she was like really brilliant. She said she started when she was 6 years old, which is honestly really insane. But beyond that, what was really interesting to me was how it's such a simple thing, and just that little like those kinds of like groundwork is truly the things that make the difference. I feel like a lot of the times we kind of feel like it's got to be these big things, for us to make a difference or impact. We have to like join these new things or like continue this already existing work. But you can be the one to lay the foundation. You can be the one to begin something, and it can be local, and it can be simple, and it can grow to become something impactful. And so it was kind of just, it was a really really unique perspective to learn about, just a young person just making a difference in their community, and it grew to be a really big difference. And so I feel like we can all just kind of learn from that. So yeah, pass it to another.
Thanks. So I think, was that yesterday? Yesterday we had listened to, a panel on Afro-feminist solutions to climate justice, which is really powerful. I think first and foremost, there is hardly any representation of Black folks here. It's just minimal. My family's Afro-Brazilian, so Brazilian people are like one of the largest delegation at COP, which makes me feel super proud. I'm like, yeah, my people are showing up, but also it's a lot of white Brazilians or indigenous Brazilians, which necessary on the latter, but it was really powerful to be in that space because I think that the perspective of descendants of enslaved peoples is really like minimal here at COP. So that representation was just really powerful for me to see as somebody who's been here for the last couple of years. But to see, on the panel, there was a woman from Barbados, but who's in Florida. There was somebody from New Orleans who I found out has the same birthday as me. What are the odds? And someone from, I think, Zambia, and then somebody from Pará, so we're right near where COP30 next year is going to be held. And then somebody from Kenya. And, this person from Kenya said that one of her friends got a badge and was asked to how do I say this? To essentially perform some sort of like sexual favor in order to keep that badge and participate in COP, which was really very horrifying and disgusting to hear, honestly. And that once she refused, her badge was flagged. And she is now, trying to figure out a way to stay here. So there is many spaces within COP that really don't feel like a safe space, and hearing a story like that was really disturbing, I'll say. But so, that's there's other sort of underlying things that happen in this space that make it really or kind of like emphasize the need for us to keep each other safe and to be building global community here. But on the other end of that, it was an emotional conversation, a powerful one about how, those of us that are absorbing and bearing the brunt of the worst parts of the climate crisis and dealing with racism and systemic oppression, et cetera, globally, are still not represented here. And then we're kind of like commodified and taken pictures of when we are here. But knowing that, there's folks who are doing organizing around justice from these lenses makes it feel all the more better and important to be here, especially as folks coming from the United States. And it makes the conversation around reparations, which I'm in right now, all the more imperative. So that was the first time that I had been in a panel like that at COP, which is a little, I mean, it's concerning, but it's also a conversation that's been needing to happen. So that was our first panel yesterday, and it was really invigorating. And then tomorrow we'll be speaking on another one, kind of like Afro feminist perspective on the need for reparations and such. So I think that some of these important conversations are happening at COP. It's just, it feels slow to the uptake, or, we aren't having microphones in those. So it's like, there's still a lot of systemic BS that happens, that is being addressed, by representation. So that was a really impactful conversation that I was a part of.
Thank you, Nalia.
I might pass it over to Andrea if she's ready.
Yeah, I met an indigenous man from Mexico, who is an engineer, so a scientist, by trade, and he's very passionate about engineering. And so we were talking because in a lot of my doctoral work, I work really closely with chemical engineers, and so we were sort of chatting about that space, but then the conversation sort of skewed to the indigenous representation, and something that kind of that surprised me about him was that he's a very technical thinker, but when he's thinking about it, engineering in terms of like the future of climate change mitigation, as an indigenous person in Mexico, he's really diving deep into like historical stories from indigenous people and artwork. So old pieces of art, especially those pieces that have been, somewhat lost to history, or sort of seen as antiquated pieces of just art, preserved pieces of art. But he's really interested in looking at the stories within those pieces of artworks, and in particular the stories around stars and plants and the different wisdoms that have been lost due to colonization. Sort of looking at those as a means to understanding how we can build a stronger future for ourselves as colonized people in colonized spaces, facing climate change, the climate change crisis, but empowering ourselves as Indigenous people with the knowledge that was taken from us by relearning it. And obviously, like there are some differences, obviously, between the more northern Indigenous folks and folks in Mexico. But that I thought that was sweet. And then one thing he asked me to tell him some stories from my people, and then he told me some from his. And so it was interesting to hear how similar they were, but also how they're very much based in the geography of the spaces in which our peoples were occupying. And I think that that's important, right? Because as we're considering how climate change is going to affect us, geography comes into play quite a bit. So I maybe thought of those little pieces separately, but I had never really thought of putting them together. And so that was very impactful for me. And I'll pass it to Cook.
Thanks. So I had a chance to attend the Power of Collaboration Unifying Forces for Net Zero talk, where it was a panel for people that were talking about it. And one of them was Dr. Andrew Forrest. And I teach environmental science. And one of the things that he said really resonated with me, and that was that instead of calling it natural disaster, we really should be calling it predictable disasters. And the power of naming something like that was just so strong for me, because really it's not natural disasters anymore. It's predictable disasters, because it's caused by the burning of the fossil fuels. And if we stop that, then we would be able to go back to being the natural disasters instead of the predictable disasters. And if not on a moral and legal ground that should stimulate the action of climate change, we could also just look at it as a finance. And one of the key things that he said is that instead of calling it net zero, where if you have some carbon emissions here but some less here, then it could have a net zero. It really should be going for real zero. In other words, there should be no burning of fossil fuels at all. And that this is an opportunity. It's actually a funding opportunity, because I believe that Dr. Andrew Forrest comes from a finance background. So he said that this is highly economic, bank and very bankable. So it's something that is doable for us to be able to switch back to natural disasters instead of predictable disasters, and it's profitable. So we just have to do it.
All right, thank you everyone for that round of conversation. I just want to shout out to the participants in this webinar that if you have a question, drop it in the Q&A and we'll get it addressed and try to answer it. We have 15 minutes left, so I'm just going to ask for some brief answers around one question. And so if those on the delegation who want to share can share one way, because I know there's probably 6,000 ways, but one way that this experience is changing the way you think about local and global climate action.
That's a really good question, Suzanne. One way, I think that this COP has reiterated for me that we will save ourselves, like we are doing the work, and it's not, it's not the national leaders. It was not the national leaders before this administration. It is not the international leaders. And sometimes it's the local people that we're electing, but it depends on our localities. So I think for me, at least, with the work that I'm doing and in the communities that I'm in, at our organization, one of the things that we talk about is like a hope as a discipline, right? So not just throwing around the word hope, or not just, acting on that or saying that and letting yourself sit in it and kind of be fine, right? So for me, like, what does hope look like? I think it means engaging in a very localized way. And that's what I'm seeing on the world stage, right? Is like people who are coming here, the most impactful people, the people who have the most to say, the people who are bringing any type of real knowledge around solutions, have an understanding of that in their education and technical and lived experience that is all incredibly local. And so that's something that I was thinking about before coming to COP, and that's definitely been cemented to me as I'm leaving COP. Manny?
I would say just when I'm working back at home, I feel like I can get really comfortable in my little bubble, just like my local work. And this has really just helped me just open my mind and branch out. And just like what Kia said earlier, that how all these like different problems happening around the globe are all really intersected and around like climate change and the climate crisis. And just being able to see that perspective here, I can really see how my mind has shifted from being more of a like local perspective, and to see how like things are really being affected on a global scale. And I'm really hoping to at least bring back like my open-mindedness, and being able to at least like hoping to shift at least like some of my classmates. And sorry, I just read the chat. Hi. uh, and hoping to shift like my classmates and my coworkers' perspective, as well as just like being a more like local based, and being able to see how like these environmental issues are affecting like the whole world. Yeah. I don't really.
Thanks, Manny.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it short. So I think for me, I think my work at home is very localized. We're very located in one, especially, a sacred site that we're stewarding. So really all this has done is just really reinvigorated me to keep going. I think what I see other folks doing around the globe is doing the same thing. And that they're really working hard to protect their sites and to figure out ways to do it. And what they really need is funding. Indigenous people especially don't need mitigation because, they have the lowest carbon footprint in all the world. So it's really adaptation and trying to survive what's going to happen and what's already happening. And so, yeah, I think what I keep hearing is the global north needs to pay for the global south. And that's definitely the message I think that's going to come out of here. Whether it will happen, I'm not sure, but yeah, we'll find out more next week, I guess. Let's go next. Okay.
One way this experience is kind of changing the way I think about local and global climate justice. I kind of already know this, but putting it in practice is a whole different thing. We have to constantly change our tactic, especially now that we have the authoritarian government that we are stepping into for the next 4 years in the US. The need for reparations is so massive, and as we know, reparations will never be enough. Whoa, it's everyone's computer at once. The need for reparations is just a down payment. I think that that's something that I really needed to hear this week. I just led a climate reparations camp in Minnesota, which was national, where we talked about our fair share. Something that I need everyone that is watching this to understand is that the global north, not just the US, but the global north owes at least $5 trillion a year to the global south, and that is still not enough. They can adapt, they can mitigate as much as they want. We can adapt, we can mitigate as much as we want. We can phase out, or not phase out, we can commit to renewable energies as a state. But if in the past 30 years, there's been a COP every year of my entire life, I'm 29. If in the last 30 years we've only cut like 1% emissions, we have to change our tactic because we're not doing the thing. And the United States continues to be the biggest blocker of progress on pretty much everything, which is already a hard thing to hold coming into the space. But now everyone's really looking at us like we're really sorry for y'all because of the thing that happened in the US. But we have to be willing to change our tactic and take a step forward in a different way. I think it's not good enough for the United States to just participate anymore. We need to be leading this discussion, and we lead this discussion in a way that is not just yet. We as people that work in climate justice do, but our government as a whole does not. So our old tactics that produce certain wins, I guess, just they're not working based on the time that we have. And I think that there's a way to have hope still with that understanding. But it's gonna call for us to change up what we're doing and not be afraid to get uncomfortable. So yeah, the work continues. Who's next?
Thanks, Queen.
So for me, I think when it comes to global and local climate work and how they, how they compare and contrast and how that's my ideas of it are kind of shifting. I feel like I'm starting to kind of see a little bit of some lines being blurred between them actually. I feel like there kind of is there isn't as much of a huge difference between them as I kind of always envisioned there to be. And I feel like especially, when we're talking about all these new policies and negotiations for all this, all this huge, these trillions of dollars, when we're actually talking about implementing this money, I mean, there needs to be when this actual investment is being put into these specific places and communities, these communities and places and local environments need to have their own climate action happening locally first. So I feel like climate action, I mean, it kind of does begin locally, and for any of that global stuff to work out, there needs to be kind of a foundation for that. And I think so when it comes to just global and local work, I think definitely knowing that it's not something so I guess different from one another, if we're able to create these foundations and have these local communities coming together and making these little policy changes or little movements or little changes in the way their economies work or the way their communities are doing things or the way that I guess they're dealing with the issues happening in their environments. Those kinds of things are what create a foundation for the investment from this global investment to actually work out and for it to actually be impactful. So yeah, so I think I'm definitely starting to see a bit of a there's a lot of cross connection between local and global climate work. So yeah. I think
Thanks.
Uh,
We probably have time for one more person to chime in briefly. Go ahead, Coog.
Thanks. I think one of the things that changed the way that this experience has changed the way that I look at things, specifically with climate change, is the urgency of it. We are reaching a tipping point, and once we reach that tipping point, there is no return. And I'd always thought we had more time, but we don't. So we need to act now, and if we don't, there will be, no planet B.
Thank you, everybody. We have about 5 minutes left, so I'm just gonna once again ask if there's any questions, and then if not, just sort of really thank you folks who are on the ground there. I know it's really late and you're all exhausted, so thank you for coming and sharing with us your brilliance and your experiences. I know I see lots of hearts coming up on the screen. I know that your words and your perspectives have impacted people because they are impacting me. And I think my big takeaway from this hour that we've had together is that hyperlocal is the way to go, right? And if we can trust that all of us in our own little neighborhoods and communities are taking just climate action, that it will scale up and across like a fractal or a giant spider web, and we can make the world whole again before it's too late. Sign up for the digest, friends, if you haven't already. Lots of awesome content being generated by this crew of people, and a summary of the negotiations every other day. We will be back next Thursday, same time, for our week 2 delegates and another round of questions and experiences and insights. Thanks, everybody. Get some rest, y'all.